Okay, welcome back to Rockstock Channel. It is Friday, October 27th, one day before my 55th birthday, tomorrow. So there's a lot of news. This is a Rockstock recap. It's Rodney and me. We thought we might do this bi-weekly, but we're doing this 1 week after the last one because there was a lot of news in the market in terms of quarterly results from Mineral Resources, Pilbara, Allkem, and Core Lithium, as well as M&A activity. Very exciting. We'll talk more about SQM, Azure, and Hancock. Before we get into this, just want to remind everybody, if you like our content, please like and subscribe and click the notification bell for Rockstock Channel on YouTube. Also, we published our most recent lithium bull called Angry Lithium, the Rolling Stonks, in a tribute to the first album in 18 years from my friends Mick Jagger and Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood. And go to our website, rkequity.com, and register your email there if you aren't getting those directly when they are published. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Lithium Royalty Corp. LIRC is the ticker code on the Toronto Stock Exchange. They have built a huge portfolio of royalties, mostly of hard rock lithium stories, including Sigma Lithium, Winsome, and a few others. We'll have more to say in the middle of this video about them, but check out their website, lithiumroyaltycorp.com. Before we talk about lithium, I do want to just make a couple comments on graphite and nickel. One, there was news on graphite export curbs or licenses needed in China from December. So this has significantly impacted Syra and some other Novonix, Nouveau Monde. What exactly is going to happen there, we're not sure. But I think Syra, as the proxy in production, they have product in the U.S. They're shipping from Mozambique. They've gotten loans from the U.S. government in Mozambique, as well as for their processing facility in Louisiana. But the point on this that's relevant for anyone who cares about lithium, our friend at Piedmont, Austin Devaney, we're going to put a screenshot of his tweet. This should make lithium consumers ex-China very nervous. This is why it's important to build conversion capacity domestically in the United States. If China aims to be an exporter of autos and will protect their domestic consumers over exporting lithium. So it's a warning shot for lithium, what they're doing in graphite. So I'll just leave that there. Australia was in the United States signing, I think, a $2 billion loan or commitment as part of the Mineral Securities Partnership. So there was news in the press about that. There was also news on nickel. A bunch of senators have sent a letter to the president arguing that Indonesia should not get a free trade agreement exception for the nickel sourced in that country. Everyone's free to buy it, but U.S. taxpayers shouldn't subsidize what they're basically saying is somewhat dirty, laterite nickel, and that's positive for our friends at Talon Metals. Pretty much the only development story in the U.S. For a clean green sulfide deposit in Minnesota, as well as in Michigan. Again, before we go into lithium, there was news on the recycling front. Our friends at the Li-Cycle had a major cost overrun in their main hub in the U.S. in New York, and their stock was down some 50%. This raises a question to all those who say just invest in recycling, and is there some risk to lithium supply sometime in the future? There might be some risk in some distant future, but the economics of recycling are a bit difficult. So Rodney, before we go into the kind of SQM, Azure, Hancock, what I called life in the fast lane part 2, she had a nasty reputation as a cruel dude. They said she was ruthless, said she was crude. Here we have Gina Rinehart again So let's talk about that in a minute, but any comments first on MinRes, Pilbara, Allkem, and Core results? I have some comments. You got to listen to 2 of those calls, but quickly, if you could summarize that. I think we may have a more comprehensive summary next week after Albemarle and Livent come out. We'll possibly bring one of our analyst friends on for that, but any quick and dirty thoughts on pricing? Did they underperform, overperform from a production point of view?
So I had a look at imports of spodumene into China for the full year, and it's on track for my number. MinRes showed production going well at Wodgina and elsewhere, but shipments actually slightly behind. Allkem, Mount Marion ahead, and Pilbara, I thought, I guess it depends on timing, but look slightly light, but again, not excessive in terms of what's being shipped out. The pricing, we knew that FOB pricing was coming off from Australia to China. I thought the MinRes and the Allkem was about, on an SC6 equivalent basis, again, MinRes 3.7 grade. That really is, it's pretty low, but their SC6 equivalent pricing, I think around 3,000, same for Allkem, and Pilbara a bit lower. So I think we can expect that to drift down, but the volumes were about right. The one thing I did notice, and we discussed, MinRes had a snippet on Bald Hill, which they are taking over. That production number is slightly ahead of where I expected. He said, I think 140 to 150. I didn't realize they were up there. So that's slightly ahead of what I thought. So if they take that over, that's a bit better than what I thought. The pricing, we know, come Q4, we're going to see lower numbers. The debate really, Howard, and it's something that I put out there, is it's a question now of how much material you ship, and certainly in the fourth quarter, if you look at where China spot prices are, non-integrated converters need to be paying only around $1,800 a ton. So that is quite a lot below where these Q3 numbers are. So the question is, are new producers in a pickle that they have to sell at that price, or are we going to see guys stepping back? Because the commentary was quite bullish, and I'm sure you can talk to that. We've seen some low forecasts from some of the banks, particularly Goldman Sachs. In order for lithium prices, chemical prices, to get to their numbers, spodumene concentrate prices have to go down to 1,000 or less. Looking at cash costs and then being realistic about all-in sustaining costs plus corporate overheads plus. I don't know. There's some producers, I think, that are going to really struggle if we go under 1,000. They're going to look to be under a lot of pressures. Hopefully that's not a reality, because without that material in the market, you're in a supply shortfall. The Q3 numbers I thought were in line. Production slightly light in a couple of places, but in aggregate looked about right, and total exports to China. So to be honest, I know people will wonder if it's cognitive dissonance, but if you look at supply and demand for this year and take out destocking, I still have us as a slight as in a deficit. So the destocking has had a material impact. I haven't seen excess supply. Is that going to play a factor going into 2024? We shall see, but it's a question now of how disciplined the spodumene producers will be in Q4 and going into Q1 next year. And I guess to your conversation now, Australia is just a bun fight for the assets now. Every asset is being disputed, and Gina Rinehart popping up on every register, and so is Chris Ellison. So if they are controlling the rock, how will they manage the process of shipments and volumes? And I noticed it wasn't Chris Ellison, but I think it was James Bruce talking on the MinRes call about manipulation of pricing. So interesting times ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what he was referring to when he was talking about the manipulation. Was he talking about shorting lithium equities, or was he talking about paper trading of the Guangzhou futures? I think it was the latter. And that there was a headline on the AFR that talked about manipulation, and there is this narrative out there that the Chinese are talking down, and the Guangzhou futures only have been, I think, trading since July. So it's been a short period of time. And as much as purchasers of real purchasers of spodumene, the converters, they tend to wait and have this momentum trading, right? If the price is going down, they keep inventories very low. But that also translates into financial speculators, right? On the Guangzhou futures, if there's a way to manipulate that, or they'll take speculative bets, and that could have wild swings. But look, we just got the
speaking, Howard. If you take the non-integrated spodumene and lepidolite out of the system, the market's going to be in a full squeeze.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, who's going to blink? Who's going to, are you going to force them to pay up and then move the prices back up, or are the spodumene producers going to blink and sell down?
Mm-hmm. I just got like every Friday S&P sends these herds, right? You know, what they're hearing in the market, and the range on the spodumene, when I was looking at it, was anywhere between, there was some herds at 1,500 and there were some at 2,300, right? Or it may be lower in some cases. Yeah, I've seen 2,300. The 1,500 was the low and 2,300 was the high. That's quite a wide range of herds, right?
It depends on the grade and so on, and how much you need to convert to get a ton of lithium chemicals, depending on the grade of the spodumene. But the bottom line is, that's practically the number that converters afford in order to produce into what is the current spot price. Are spodumene producers going to continue to be dictated on the margin there? Because you can't, it's not all on contract and high, and you're seeing the pricing coming out of producers drifting down. In the end, it can be a quarter or two, but in the end, if the prices stay consistently lower, eventually things have to meet, other than the fixed price contracts that Albemarle and others have. So this is going to be an interesting one, but I guess you can't build conversion capacity outside of China quick enough in order to avoid what is this black box of destocking that seems to be lasting longer than all of us had hoped.
Yeah. And we'll go into that a bit, because we have had some de-escalation or downgrading of EV plans from GM and Ford announced. On the flip side, you had LG ramping up in Arizona of their 4680 cells. So let's talk about that in a little bit. But going back to Hancock on the tape this morning, again, in a similar way for Liontown, casting some shade on, I forget, I don't have the quote exactly in front of me. I tweeted it, but you said it has high prospectivity, but there's still a lot of risk associated with Azure and Andover. But before commenting specifically on Gina and Chris Ellison and that, I got an inquiry from a Chilean journalist yesterday. What did it mean that SQM was making, equivalent of a $2.4 billion bid for the whole asset for 100%? They were bidding for the company, but only owned 60% of the asset. But if you look at just Andover, 2.4 billion Aussie dollars, and they could have bought Lithium Power International, which Codelco is buying, for $300 million, right? What's this dichotomy? That right in their backyard, a high quality definitive feasibility study, permitted brine, they're not buying. And the implication there was maybe the negotiations that SQM is having with the government on the extension of their lease is not going so well. And this is why SQM is looking to diversify further outside of Chile. They did that with Lithium Americas back in the day. They went in, Morgan Stanley in particular argued that that was just a negotiating tactic when they bought 50% for $25 million, and then they walked away. This is very different. They are very much embedded in Mount Holland. I did a comparison. When they came in 2017, they got 50% of Mount Holland for in buying Kidman for about 130 or 150 million dollars. There was a convert, and then there was an earn-in on the at the project level. And here we are 6 years later, and they're bidding for a whole company, but only 60% of an asset for 15 or 20 times more the valuation. So I think there's a comment here that Chile's pain is Australia's gain here, because SQM is a very conservative company and they typically don't pay up. This is a very big price that SQM is paying to in a pre-resource company. But it's possible that they're going to get gazumped by Gina, right? Like, she now owns 18%. I'm not super sophisticated on all of the M&A rules in Australia to gauge whether or not this is such a blocking stake that's going to prevent it from happening. We'll see what happens, and we'll see if Azure price gets knocked back in a similar way as Liontown's did. Azure doesn't need as much capital. They're not as advanced in their studies, but it very much seems that I looked on their website. Gina Rinehart and her father, in a similar way that Andrew Forrest and his father, they're very tied to Australia. They're very patriotic Australians. In the similar way, Chris Ellison wants to move downstream. And so there's, I think, very much, whereas in Chile, you have the government saying, these are our resources and we're going to regulate. Like in Australia, you have these entrepreneurial patriots who are very successful in iron ore in particular. And they're exerting, in a rough and tumble capitalist society, saying, these are foreigners beware. These are this is our playground. We know this mining, and for all the talk we've had over the years about big auto, big battery, big mining, big chemical, as prospectively writing big checks come into lithium, no one is really forecasting like big family office, big. Hancock is not the traditional mining company. Yes, very successful with Roy Hill, et cetera, but this is very much a nimble actor, right? Playing a very cool game here in the Western Australian backyard. But I worry a little bit because I've worried on previous videos that we've done that this very cozy duopoly we had 2 years ago with Albemarle, mothballing Wodgina, and Pilbara mothballing Altura, those have now been switched on. There's no more duopoly in spodumene anymore. You have, with Minres pulling back from Albemarle, and they do have some constraint in voting for or pushing through with train 4 at Wodgina. They did comment, James Bruce did comment that I think they're going to make an FID on that in next quarter, but then it'll take 2 years to build. But that does need Albemarle's approval. I think they'll get that because Albemarle is going to be somewhat short spodumene. But here you have Hancock, a very credible player, deep-pocketed. Will spodumene evolve into an oligopoly like you currently have with BHP, Rio, and Vale, and then some smaller players? Or will it be like, I don't know, copper or any other commodity that has half a dozen or more players, all just acting independently, and the lowest cost producers will survive? I think we're moving in that direction. But I think it's very good for Australia. Australia's market share in lithium, spodumene in particular, is going to grow in a similar way, or has grown. But if you look at Indonesia in nickel, Australia in spodumene, it's clearly lithium units, that's happening. But what the end game is, we don't know. Hancock does have some partnership with MinRes in iron ore. I could easily see Chris Ellison getting mine services contracts for Hancock at Liontown or at Azure over time. But there's a lot more to play out here. But as you said, you tweeted, I think, that there's very little left in Australia. There's Global Lithium, although Wildcat is like also, we say there's very little left, but there's new things all the time. Some have argued a year or two ago, Australia's peak spodumene, right? There's only so much in the country, but they're making lots of new discoveries here. So maybe that's not actually the case. But I don't know. I think you will start seeing attention turned to Canadian plays and Brazilian plays. I think there's already there's rumors of Hancock and Pilbara already in Patriot or some of the other players there, but they seem to care. Hancock seems to care about large size. MinRes is happy to go into smaller size. You're right. They bought Alita Essential Metals. Anyway, how do you see things playing out?
I think how it is, there's a desire and a will, and there's a reality. We have the IRA, we've got other initiatives. You've got, and Chris Edison trying to get things going in Australia. The one thing I think that is important, although again, as I say, it's got to tie into reality, is none of these transactions and none of these deals and none of these developments is with the intention of selling that spodumene to China.
Mm-hmm.
It's either a midstream product or it's production elsewhere in the world or something else, or tolling and then doing your own contracts elsewhere in the world. Now, the question is, can you deliver on that desire? Because if you can get Corpus Christi going, Piedmont, Tennessee, or other Bécancour, and getting production up and running elsewhere in the world, then we're likely to see more throughput and more transparency, and linking that to people's EV ambitions and volumes. At the moment, what's going into China and then what's produced and then what's coming out is hard to see. And the other threat is it looks like, in terms of EV exports out of China, that number's, I saw a chart. I'm scared to repeat the number, it was so high. But at the moment, all the units, feedstock is heading to China. It's getting converted if they are not selling it domestically, because the growth rate, the penetration rate is high. So you're just not getting the types of EV growth, sales growth that you did. It's either that or exporting. How risky or how tough is it going to be for someone now as an incumbent OEM to compete against BYD and others globally selling into developing countries, where if they've established themselves and they've got low-priced EVs, which is something I keep raising to you, is where are the low-cost EVs from the other companies that don't make enough money? They're losing money, they don't want to make them. So they've been pulling those units. So the low-hanging fruit of the SUV market, of the truck market, or whatever, I get it. There's more room and margin in that, but that's not where the vast majority of cars are sold globally. So it's a bigger question and issue is, can you keep the units? Can you lower the need for spodumene producers in the world to ship to China? And then how big is the threat out of Africa and elsewhere? We're seeing various different rules being put into place in different countries about how the material needs to be beneficiated in country. Will that catch on in Africa, or is it just you can't ship raw DSO? You've got to ship a spodumene or whatever, some a processed product. And is that enough for China to keep a grip on this market? So if this year has taught us anything, again, the price ran hot, and now they've really exacted some revenge in this destocking. We're all scratching our heads how it can last this long. I think everyone would rather see transparency and possibly the downstream and value add being balanced up ex-China. So that is the intention, as far as I can tell, with Chris Ellison. I'm sure Gina Rinehart will go the same way, and as are the other companies, but you still got to deliver on the downstream and make that happen. And I don't think it can happen quickly enough. But hopefully it will. Otherwise, the big play here, think about the big play. The big play here is keep the prices low, make cheap EVs, no one else does, and dominate world EV sales. And it's going to put a lot of people out of business and take a lot of auto jobs in the world and ship and transfer those to China.
Jumping in here from the editing room to tell you about Lithium Royalty Corp. Lithium Royalty Corp is at the center of a global energy transition and manages a globally diversified portfolio of lithium-focused royalties in electrification and decarbonization. With 32 royalties on 29 higher-grade, lower-cost projects from exploration to production, LIRC covers all the bases with well-managed risk, ESG considerations, and a scalable royalty structure. Lithium Royalty Corp is traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, ticker symbol LIRC. To find out more, visit lithiumroyaltycorp.com. Yeah, that'll be untenable. The auto industry in America and in Germany, I can't see even if it's Teslas, just making cheap Teslas and exporting whole cars to decimate the industry here. The UAW, I think, cut a tentative deal with Ford, and let's hope that gets done. And then GM and Stellantis too. It would be great to get that out of the headlines. I think that there's a lot of cross currents in the market, many of them negative, which are impacting the lithium thematic. I would say that the equities have rebounded a little bit, or seem to have stabilized this week. There was a very big short position in Pilbara. The results were not very good, either from a production standpoint, a cost standpoint, and a price received standpoint. They argue that because they're not on long contracts like some of their peers, they're first to feel the pain, and also first to feel the gain. If you remember last year, they were with the BMX auctions. They had that stellar year on the upside. So in looking for leading indicators, maybe Pilbara and the price received they're getting will be a good indicator. But the UAW strike, some were arguing that, like, they're saying, oh, you're making all these profits, and it's very costly. It's going to be even more expensive to make ICE vehicles. Tesla's price cuts have clearly hurt Ford and GM, and they've just been subsidizing their EV investments with profits from elsewhere, and now the UAW is going to be taking a significant portion of those profits. I think that might the UAW may not have said that that's their explicit intention, is we want to slow EVs because we realize we're going to lose jobs from EVs, but that might very well have been their intention here. But that's a real risk. They have, I think, Ford, which made big announcements about their Tennessee plants and Kentucky. I think they're slowing down on Kentucky, but they're still going through with the Blue Oval SK in Tennessee. The headline is like they're slowing $12 billion worth of investment. It's slowing, it's not stopping, but I don't know how much all of this is factored into everyone's models. Did they assume that GM and Ford were going to sell this many models, and therefore that's going to translate into this number of gigawatt hours of batteries? And if they're not achieving that, do people's demand expectations in aggregate for gigawatt hour deployed go down? Or is something like LG in Arizona ramping up the 4680 so that they can go to Tesla? Tesla just gained market share to make up for GM and Ford. What do you think from this news flow? Because I read it as, if there's a demand problem and no one's stopping on the supply side, this structural deficit that we're all forecasting may disappear in the short term.
Yeah, look, this year we've got, my model is gigawatt hours deployed is up, I think, 48%. So that's hardly a wilting flower. As I said, I have no demand hiccups in my model. Lathrop, I thought, was going to ramp a little quicker on the energy storage side, but that's kicking into gear. And as Tesla's going to build Shanghai next year, I think the Cybertruck, he didn't say production hell, but he said it's difficult, because I did expect that to kick in. And the semi, I do think if there are batteries available, as long as he can build those, as long as there's the capacity to do that, there is demand for that. The semi numbers I saw in terms of how far they trucked off a full charge and a full load was pretty impressive. EV demand in the US is to kick in. Certain companies are going to benefit more than others. The question is, does it politically become a bit of a hot potato if some are falling behind rather than others, that you need to now rein in the initiative to give them a bit of a breathing room? We don't want that with the IRA in, but the one thing this year, the rest of the world, albeit off a small base, EV sales are growing at over 100%. So a lot of regional areas are kicking in with EVs. I don't see disappointment on the demand side. As I say, on the supply side, in terms of what's been produced and how much in the battery grade side, I don't have oversupply this year. The destocking has thrown it out of whack versus how much inventory was built up last year. So at some point in time, that kind of needs to level out. But I made this comment years ago, and people didn't necessarily believe it, but the transition to EVs could have some marquee name casualties.
I think it will. And politically, let's see how this is going to play out. I just watched U.S. politics and other U.S. moves. Chevron is buying Hess. That's another mega merger in oil after Exxon buying Pioneer. For all the oil companies dabbling with petty cash into DLE plays, the fossil fuel will be here for a while. And they're making significant bets on that, and they're not making big bets yet on lithium. I think the oil companies will go into the liquids, whatever the geothermals and the oil field brines. That seems to be their preference. A couple of pieces of good news just to remind people about is so BP is now buying Tesla superchargers, $100 million. I had a funeral to go to in Albany, which is 300 miles. And I don't have a Tesla yet or an electric vehicle. I'm still driving a 14-year-old Acura MDX, but I made it there and back I was half full when I left. So I did need to fill up, but I could have made the whole trip without stopping. But when I did stop, I noticed that, I forget exactly what station I was at, but there was this one sole charger there, which was the older standard. I don't know how long the guy was having to charge there, but if everybody follows BP's lead and have superchargers at these stations, I think that would be a huge boon. I did this video earlier in the year when I rented the Tesla, and I just drove all around Florida, and the supercharging network is hugely important. And the fact that GM and Ford signed on with Tesla earlier this year, addressing the charging, and now we have BP, and I think Exxon and other gas stations will follow. That's a big positive. The Cybertruck launch November 30th is a big positive. I think the Model 3 refresh, Highland. So there's good news. I think there are good news elements there. Yes, the price wars are impacting Ford and GM's decisions, but to Elon Musk's point, high interest rates are affecting car purchases, and that's certainly impacting Tesla, but it's impacting buying an F-150 Lightning, right? These still are relatively expensive cars, and it is a cyclical industry, and with wars.
But I mean, my point is how it is. The semi is very competitive as a product, not in the car space, but in the trucking space. And on the energy storage side, the mega pack and the bigger form batteries they're making in China and so on, they have legislation on how much backup you need as you take on renewables and so on. And renewables are doing extremely well in terms of installation. So there's a lot of non-auto demand that can pick up some of the slack. It's a question of how quickly they can ramp that production, but I think that's catching on. And I think I still, although to be honest, I've seen a couple of others now putting in big forecasts. I was industry outlier on energy storage, but I really think that could surprise on the upside, and that's a legislative thing, and that's competitive, high interest rate, not interest rate, against gas peakers and so on in the US. From an economic point of view, it makes complete sense to put those in. So as long as you can make them, you can sell them.
I think that's a great point. And on the semis as well, the total cost of ownership is very meaningful for a commercial buyer, maybe not a retail consumer who can't figure out the math. They just want the sticker price. Another important part on the sticker price is that the 7,500 credit in America will be at the point of sale from next year, as opposed to waiting a year on your tax returns to get a credit from it, and that will impact buying behavior. And it also will, if you're getting a loan or a lease, it comes right off the top. Right, so the lease payment or the interest payment will be lower by that 7,500. So there's a number of things there, but you're right. Energy storage was a very significant bright spot in Tesla's earnings, and so that's definitely it's not as sexy as the sexy cars. Like so much of the EV thematic from a retail perspective was like it's all cars.
But the margins are very lithium. Good,
though. They are. Absolutely. I'll mention another thing. My friend Matt Dio, Bank of America's lithium analyst, appeared as the vice president of business development strategy at Sigma, which I found pretty interesting because Sigma I thought was for sale. he may be there for a very short period of time. If maybe there's some change of control provision in his contract, or maybe Sigma is going to go on some growth trajectory here. Maybe they'll consolidate some stuff in Brazil. But Rodney, we've had a fair bit of talks. I've been a bit nervous. I'm the lithium bull, and I'm thinking maybe I'm a contrarian indicator, just being so worried. But you're you've been buying stuff, right, as it's gotten cheaper and cheaper, right, on the exploration side in particular. And another, this is where you you prove your mettle as a trader. And I'm reading it also in the Tesla community on Twitter. There's the short-term traders and long-term believers. I think the long-term thesis is intact, but everybody, are we in some echo chamber? You listen to Mineral Resources, Pilbara, the actions of Hancock, the actions of SQM, Albemarle, MinRes, they're making big bets, long-term view. They're not worried about the short term, and that makes me comfortable, and their commentary makes me comfortable. But it's nevertheless tough, and but especially on the real risky side, early stage companies with just a minimal of, I don't know, $5 or $8 million in capital that haven't yet drilled. But Wildcat came out of nowhere, Azure came out of nowhere. Where are the next ones? We're looking for them in Champion Electric Metals, in Solis Minerals in Brazil, in Stellar Metals, in Australia, that's Stephen Biggins, and of course Winsome, which is talking about a 50 to 60 million ton resource, hopefully sometime early next year. And then Patriots, a lot of the stocks were up overnight, so there's some shorting activity going on. But are we going to get, is there a thought that there's not much left in Australia, and valuation disconnect with the Crocodile Dundees in Canada and other locales? Is that next? Any comments?
You think about it, Howard. So we keep having this. So every time you put the squeeze on prices and things get tougher, it gets harder for people to raise. Everyone we've spoken to says raising money is tougher. So everything is delayed. Some of the drill programs and some of the feasibilities and stuff are going to be pushed out that little bit further. So by doing this, you're just sowing the seeds of the next bull run. We'll see how quickly will MinRes and Albemarle have that conversation, pull the trigger and do train 4. Even in the big players, the reality is, as I say, the destocking has thrown things out slightly, but in terms of the broader numbers, the moves that incumbents are making are not suggestive of wanting to slow things down or leave things to chance. They want to get involved. I think as being part of the industry and as investors ourselves, it is helpful. And I always say this, who do you want to set the chemical price? Do you want a Western incumbent, or do you want a non-integrated Chinese converter to do that? So the more spodumene that falls under the control of ex-China players that can either toll or do an intermediate product or ship to Korea or wherever it is, or the US, and do it separately, the more you're likely to have a better and clearer line of sight as to what's going on with inventories and with production volumes and sales. Because if you look at the depth of information we now get, when you and I were doing this 5 years ago, we didn't get line of sight. Now IGO, MinRes, you get a good sense of who's produced what the inventories are, and where we're at. And I guess that gives me more comfort to say I can tie that in with the mid and downstream. And so it is encouraging to see that guys are prepared to spend. And yeah, I think the focus and the attention still remains in tier 1 jurisdictions, and now you're likely to add Brazil into that mix. With all the woes going on, we think that Atlantic's been unfairly treated, sitting in Africa, but in a top-rated Fraser Institute mining friendliness jurisdiction. But it's likely that the major players are still going to avoid Africa, looking at what's going on with some of the companies in some of the countries and restrictions. They're likely to step back there. So it's likely to remain Australia, Canada, US, Brazil.
Those are all good points, and I'll make a couple of points on that. Firstly, for everyone watching here, should tune into our most recent video with the Atlantic team, which we entitled Ghana's Spodumene Software License, to follow Elon Musk, license to print money. They may not be taken over because they have Azure at 25% and Piedmont 9%. But going into production, very low cost, this should be a money printing machine, and they're now licensed to do that. So that stock's very undervalued in our opinion, as is Critical Elements in permitted, ready for partnership. It seems that the market or the strategics, it doesn't need to be a certain size to attract these big takeover bids. Critical Elements could be taken over, right? They own 100% of their asset. We think there's a lot of undiscovered upside in their exploration tenements, but we'll leave that aside. We hope to get JS on video sometime in the not too distant future. But in terms of tier one jurisdictions, I will say that buried in, I didn't listen to the Allkem call. Maybe they said this in there, and if they did, forgive me for not knowing this, but buried in their written filing was that the Allkem and Livent merger is making significant progress, and they've actually announced the name Arcardium. And when I was looking at that, I thought to myself, RK, equity, right? Because 20 years ago or 15 years ago, I thought of renaming RK, and we looked at like Arcadia, and Arcadia was a very prevalent name. Like we couldn't take it, like it was there. But so I looked at Arcardium. I was like, okay, that's better than Livent. It's better than Allkem. And as I'm looking at it now, it's Argentina, R, and CAD for Canada, and lithium, the Arcardium. That must be how they did that. And I don't know if they discussed that in the call. If they did, I'm not presenting any news here, but it seems that that's what they did. Argentina, Canada. And what I think is going to be very interesting to watch next year is that Paul Graves, not necessarily the most entrepreneurial of CEOs in my observation. I like him. He's a great has been a great voice in the industry, and his conference calls are give the most insight. But when other players were doing a lot of entrepreneurial things over the last 5 years, he didn't do very much. But here we are. He's going to have James Bay, and he has Nemaska. He's going to be like positioned as a major player to potentially be a consolidator in Quebec. Or maybe they'll get consolidated by someone like Rio Tinto, to be seen. But that merger is going through. That's a real player. I still am hoping and thinking that maybe Albemarle will approach Pilbara with a cash and share offer at some point in the future, like they did to get their footprint with Rockwood. If they did that, that could instill some discipline in the spodumene market, which I was alluding to, is disappearing now that you have so many other players. Okay, I think we covered a lot of ground there. I don't have anything more listed here as I was making all the bullet points this morning. This is just 1 week since the last week that we did this. Another exciting week in lithium world, and also some battery materials with the graphite and nickel discussion, as we mentioned. Any final points? Anything I missed, Rodney?
No, I think that covers it. And let's see. I noticed there was an uptick in spodumene imports into China in September. We know there was a bit of a congestion with MinRes. Let's see how we go into year end. But hopefully with the launch of the Cyber and some of the other new models, and 2024 is also normally it's the year before Europe has that step change into the higher CO2 penalties in 2025, so they tend to step up, although I guess they could import vehicles, but that normally means better sales. Let's see how we go with all the macro data coming through, what EV sales looked like into year end. Last year was very strong, so I'm not expecting massive growth on growth, but year on year growth. But so far it looks to be sound, and and hopefully we finish the year strongish, and we'll see if there's some restocking in the near future.
I'll make one more comment on your comment, because someone commented to us that, Jesus, you spent all this time talking and not one mention of Europe. So you just mentioned Europe, and I am trying to, I've been exchanging texts with my friend Keith Coughlin at European Metals Holdings, who again is in Prague. I don't know, he's there every 6 weeks or so. So things, I believe, are heating up in Europe. Actually, I'll mention Vulcan received like a $200 million conditional commitment from some export credit agencies in Australia. That's a good sign. It's obviously conditional. It's only one piece. I think they have a 2 billion CapEx, so only 90% more to go. We think it's very difficult when you have a very low equity valuation and a big CapEx need. That's always a very hard thing to accomplish. But in the case of European Metals Holdings, the strategic Sinovac deposit, it is hard rock. It's not spodumene, but we think we didn't really talk about LFP. GM said that for the Ultium battery, for the low-cost vehicles, they will now be making some LFP. I think that also is going to take place in Europe. The Sinovac deposit can do carbon, it can do hydroxide, it can do lithium phosphate, I think. Anyway, to be continued on, we'll address that in greater detail in future videos. But we've been here a bit long. Hope you enjoyed this video. And again, if you did, comment, subscribe. Also, by the way, on Patreon, one thing that we do for $100 and $300 subscribers, apart from these quarterly conference calls, Rodney does write proprietary research on the earnings results from Minres, Pilbara, Allkem, and Livent, and Albemarle will be coming out next week. So if you want that detailed analysis, we comment briefly on it here, but please visit us at patreon.com/rockstockchannel. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye to my 54th year tomorrow, and we'll revisit you next year, 1 year older. Take care.